Hey, what's up? I'm Dave. I'm a Brooklyn-based heavy metal music producer, and I'm here with techniques to help you level up your production, mixing, and mastering skills for heavy music specifically. I'm also co-owner of Very Friendly Studios. We are currently moving into a new space, which is going to be the largest live recording space in all of Brooklyn, and we are purpose-built for heavy music. While we navigate permits and construction, I'm filming a video series to offer some answers to the questions that I get asked the most often to help people get better at creating professional sounding metal mixes. So I figured the best place to start would probably be with the question that I get asked the most often, which is how do I get guitars to sound good in a mix? Guitar tone is absolutely critical to modern metal. Most modern metal songs are structured entirely around the guitar, so you gotta find a way to nail that first if you wanna have a professional sounding mix at the end. And I'm gonna break it down with the 6 techniques that I employ to make sure that I get it right every single time. The challenge with modern metal music is it's really crowded. Most modern metal you can think of is stacking not only guitar with bass and drums and vocals, but also 2 to 3 different synth pads, if not more than that, sound effects, pitch shifting, up-tune, down-tune vocals, and basically every single area of the frequency spectrum. So the challenge as a producer is always, how do you get guitars to punch through and cut through all of that chaos with clarity and brutality at the same time? And that's what we're gonna get into today. So the path that I take on any extreme metal song that I'm producing or mixing is always going to start with guitar tone. And when I'm starting with guitar tone, the goal that I have with my guitar tone is to occupy as much of the frequency spectrum as I possibly can to get a huge wall of sound in my guitars. So there are 3 factors that are going to determine the tone of your guitar. The first factor is the guitar you're playing. The second factor is the amp that you're plugging it into. And the third factor is the cabinet and how it's mic'd. Let's start with selecting guitars. So before I even get into the box, I need to pick the right guitars so that I'm getting the right tones. And I'm gonna pick a couple different guitars, and what I want is for the tones of those guitars to balance each other and also to create cohesion. Usually I'm gonna pick one guitar to cover the high range frequencies in the bite, and another guitar to provide darkness, smoothness, and woodiness in the low end. And if I add those 2 guitars together correctly in my mix, I'm gonna get that balance and that wall of sound that I'm looking for. So today I'm gonna be using a Jackson Soloist for my high and bright tones, and I'm gonna be using a Gibson Corvus 2 for my lower and darker tones. Now, check this guitar out if you haven't seen one. It's just totally insane looking. Love this thing. Now on the Soloist, you can see I took the stock EMGs out and I replaced them with a Seymour Duncan Sentient in the neck and a Lundgren M6 in the bridge. The M6 is just a super crisp and dry pickup that's gonna make my upper mid-range really bite in the mix. The Lundgren M series is about as famous as it gets, too, for its role in the Meshuggah guitar sound, which is probably the most articulate modern metal guitar tone out there. And for the Corvus, I replaced those stock pickups with Lundgren Black Heaven pickups in the neck and a bare knuckle mule pickup in the bridge position. This gives me a much woodier and darker tone on this guitar. So now as I start selecting the amps I want to use, I want to be picking amps that are going to really bring out those tonal qualities that I just picked in my guitars. So let's start with the high guitar first. I'm going to go with the Fortin Nameless X plugin from Neural DSP. This is based on the Fortin Meshuggah amp. It's got amazing high-end articulation. The razor, the chainsaw, that bite that you get around 1800 to 2500 hertz. So now I'm going to record a little run of the rhythm guitar section for the song I'm working on, and this is going to give me a snippet that I can loop to get the rest of my processing dialed in. So first I'm going to dial in the mid, bass, and treble controls on the loop that I just recorded. I'm going to push a little bit on the bass, I'm going to push a little bit on the treble, and I'm going to pull off a little bit on the mids. That's going to scoop out some of the muddiness and give me that crispness and that bite that I'm looking for on this amp. Think right about there. Now I like an overdriven high gain sound, but if you have your gain knobs cranked and your overdrive, it's going to sound like a mess. So to get ready to apply the saturation, the first thing I'm going to do is actually roll as much of the gain off as possible. So I'm going to take the two gain knobs, bring them down low, start playing the loop, and then I'm going to roll them up slowly but surely until right when I start to hear the crunch. Right about there. Next, I'm going to start to play with options for pedals. And the pedal I'm going to go with here is the Grind pedal by Fortin. It's in the Nameless X plugin. And what this does is it brings up even more high-end articulation, even more bite, while controlling the low end even better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to engage this pedal, start the loop, and just dial it to where I feel like I'm getting the bite that I need here. Right about there. But I'm not hearing that crazy, insane high gain sound that I'm looking for yet. So now it's time to bring some of the gain back in now that I have the pedal engaged. So I'm going to start by increasing the input from the gain knob at left, and then I'm going to play with the two knobs at right until I get it to a place that I'm happy. That's more like it. So Neural has a really great built-in impulse response for its cab structure here, and it lets you play with the mics in a way that's really intuitive. So the big decision here is what mic am I going to use? And for the high-end bite sound on my high guitar, I'm always going to go for the SM57. You can see it's loaded here. I have the right speaker turned off. And if you look at where the mic is, you can slide it closer to the center of the cone or further to the edge of the cup. And that's going to give you different sounds. Generally, you're going to get more bite when you're right up on the cone, and you're going to get more darkness, more wood, more space when you move it further and further to the edge. I'll show you what I mean. Now, when I'm right in the center of the cone, it's a little too harsh for me, but I love the bite there. So I'm just going to move this a hair to the left, just at the edge of the cone, and that's usually the sweet spot. Right about there. So now I'm feeling pretty good about where we've gotten the tone of the amp on my high guitar. I got to go through the exact same exercise on this bad boy. For my darker guitar, I'm going to grab the Soldano. And the Soldano is a great counterpoint to the Nameless because the Soldano has a really round, rich bottom end and a much darker tone. So I'm going to get started on this amp the same way I did with the Nameless, and I'm going to adjust my bass, mid, and treble nods until I get them where I like them. But what I'm going to do is the opposite of what I did before. I'm still going to push the bass a little bit, but rather than scooping the mids, I'm going to really push the mids and let them shine. And rather than pushing the treble, I'm going to pull back on that. And what this is going to do is further accentuate that low end and really balance out the higher and biting tones that we're getting from the other amp. So right about there. I also might want to push the presence a little bit here just so that I can bring back a little bit of the clarity I took out when I dipped on the treble. Right about there. Now for the last part of the darker guitar tone, I'm going to set up my cab. Now, in this case, I'm not going to use the 57 for the exact same reason that I did use it on the other amp. It's a really bright microphone. Instead, I'm going to stick with the Royer 121. That's the ribbon mic on the right side of the screen. I'm going to go ahead and disengage the 57. I'm going to play this with the 121 on and just move the mic around until I hear the tone I'm looking for. Hear how much darker and earthier that is than the other guitar. I have a feeling these two are going to fit together really well. Great, so now we have our tones dialed on the guitar and on the amp. I'm going to pan one hard left and one hard right and hit play, and you should be able to hear the difference in tonality coming together here. So if you're not familiar, quad tracking means you're literally going to play exactly the same guitar part 4 times. In this case, we're going to have 2 takes on the high guitar and 2 takes on the low guitar. Then you can get creative with how you pan those takes to really create a massive wall of guitar. So here I have my 4 identical takes that are good enough, close enough to create the wall of sound without creating mush. You'll see that for my top 2 guitars, the high-end bike guitars, I'm using the Fortin Nameless X plugin on both of those, the one we just dialed, and I'm using the same amp for the lower 2 as well. I got the Soldano on each of those. But you don't want to have identical tones pan left and right in a quad track. You might have phase issues there. It just doesn't sound quite right. So I like to introduce 1 degree of variation across the pair so that I can create more depth in the sound. So you recall when we set up the Fortin Nameless X on the first guitar, we used the built-in cabinet and the SM57 microphone that came with that cabinet to get the sound that we wanted. So what I like to do is change one of those 2 things, either change the microphone or change the cabinet, but only one of those variables. So I'm getting a little bit of difference in sound, but not enough to really make it sound different, right? So what I've chosen to do here is I've chosen to use the same microphone, but a different cabinet. And I'm accomplishing this by loading an impulse response or an IR. What an IR is, it's a signal where somebody used a microphone and some technology to perfectly map the signal created by one microphone and a cabinet that it's placed in front of. I really like the York Audio IRs. That's what I'm using here. And what I'm doing is I'm using a Mesa Boogie cabinet. That's what this OH 4x12 rectifier means with V30 speakers in it. And I'm using the same exact microphone as we used on the other amp, the 57. And that's going to create a little bit of difference in tone, which is going to give me some nice depth in my pair. So now let's go ahead and do that exact same thing on the Soldano cab. In the Soldano cab, in the first case, I was again using the built-in stock cabinet that comes with the Neural DSP plugin, and I was using the Royer 121 ribbon microphone. So I want to do exactly the same microphone, but a different cabinet. And this is where it gets even trickier, because what I really like to do is make the different cabinet for the second pair identical to the different cabinet of the first pair. So that means we have one high guitar playing one amp on one cabinet with one mic. We have another high guitar where everything is the same except for the cabinet. And since we're doing the same thing on the low end, what I'm doing is making that second cabinet the same as the second cabinet on the high pair. So to do that, I'm using the York Audio impulse response again. I'm using the exact same Mesa Boogie 4x12 rectifier cabinet, same V30 speakers, but instead of using the 57, I'm using the 121. So I got the same cab as the second guitar from the high pair and the same microphone as the first guitar from the low pair. And that's just going to create a lot of tonal cohesion across this quad track that I'm getting set up here. So let's see what that pair sounds like. As you can see, a very, very different sound. So for quad track panning, there's a million different ways to do this. Everybody who's done this has kind of their own way. Here's how I do it. I like to hard pan all the way left and all the way right, the high pair guitars. So you can see I have those panned all the way to the left and all the way to the right. And then down here with the lower guitars, I like to pan these at, somewhere between 50 and 80%. And by doing this, I'm occupying not only the full frequency spectrum, but I'm also occupying a lot of space. I'm not only way out to the left and right, I'm also panned in just a little bit from there so that you can really feel like you're getting surrounded by the guitars. And this is what it sounds like with all of them engaged in my quad track here. So at this point, you should start to be getting that massive sound. And if you're not getting that massive sound yet, there might be an issue in your tone. It might be worth going back and tinkering with the guitar settings, the amp settings, the microphone, because it should start to come together and start to sound pretty heavy here. Messy, still some cleanup to do, but we are getting that weight now. So now our guitar tone is coming along nicely. We have a really big quad track effect happening. We got a wall of sound. It's brutal, but it's still kind of messy. We're not hearing clear articulation of all the notes that we want in each of these tracks. And that's where it's time to now introduce EQ carving. What we're going to do with EQ carving is we're going to be gentle. We're not going to go crazy with massive EQ moves. We're just going to make a couple targeted moves that are going to really let the notes that we want to shine on each of these tracks. So first what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit play, hear the music, and cut out all the low end information that I don't need from this guitar. And most engineers will tell you not to mix with your eyes. Pro Q3 makes it really easy to mix with your eyes, honestly. You'll see when I hit play, you can clearly see where the fundamental frequency is, this big bump on the low. And what I want to do is high pass right up to that. I'm willing to be a little more aggressive with my high pass, somewhere between 90 and maybe 110 hertz. All that's doing is cutting out rumble, stuff that I don't really need, and it's making more space for the lower pair of guitars that I'm going to bring in later. So next, I'm going to start working on the mid-range here, probably the low mids first. As you can see from this signal, we are pretty scooped. See, we got that nice scoop in there between 200 and 500. Not a whole lot that I probably need to do there. The guitar is not sounding muddy. So I'm going to shift my focus now up into the bite range, which is going to be between 1800 and maybe 2500 hertz. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a hold of this EQ curve, boost it a very tiny amount, maybe 1 dB max, and sweep it around a little bit until I really start to hear that bite popping out. So I wound up getting a 1.5 decibel boost, and I'm really hearing the bite that I'm looking for right there around 2200. Next, I want to focus my attention on the high end. Most modern metal, if you're doing gent or you're doing deathcore or something really tight, you're probably going to low pass this and clear out that upper frequency noise. A lot of producers want to get rid of the hiss. That's not me. I want that noise. I want that raw in the room sound. I don't want to take that stuff out. I want to really let it scream because that's what it sounds like when you're at a show. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm not going to cut these frequencies. I'm actually going to boost them a little bit. And I'm going to look for a good spot to do that, probably somewhere around 7,000 or 8,000 hertz. So I wound up at 6,800 hertz. I put a shelf there and boosted it around 3 decibels. And it's really giving it a thrashy vibe that I really like. And I don't really like to mess around too much with the pair. So once I have one of them figured out, I'm literally just going to copy that over to the other of the pair. And the differences in tone are really going to come from the cab decisions that I made. So let's just see what that sounds like now with just that pair engaged now that it's got the EQ. So tighter on the low end, but even more pissed off on the high end. And that's exactly what I'm looking for here. So now I'm going to take the same sequence of approaches here to get the EQ carved properly on my low pair. I'm going to pick one of the two. I'm going to center it. I'm going to turn it up. I'm going to hard pan the other pair and bring them down so I can hear the guitar that I'm working on the best, but I can still hear the context it's sitting in. And then I'm going to focus on the low end, the mid range, and the high end. A couple differences here. One, I'm going to cut not nearly as high as I just cut on my high pair. So my high pass here is going to be maybe 10 or 20 hertz lower. I expect it to be somewhere around 70 or 80 hertz versus 90 to 100 hertz. So we're going to still bring out the rumble, but we're going to leave a little bit of room there to let the low end of these rhythm guitars shine and really fill that part of the frequency spectrum that the high end guitars are not. You can see I also boosted a little bit there. I like that round low end sound that I'm getting from the Soldano with the overdrive, and I want to make sure that that beef is really coming through in the mix. So now I'm going to look at the mid range, and rather than focusing on the bite, rather than looking at 1800, 2500 hertz, I'm going to be a lot more focused on the frequencies just before that, where you can really feel the body and kind of the chest behind this rhythm guitar. And I'm going to find another area that I can kind of comfortably boost here. So I'm liking what I'm getting there around 1281 or 1300 hertz. You see I put like a 1.24 decibel boost there, and that's bringing out some of that chest again on this rhythm guitar. So now I'm going to look at the high end, and you have options here. I think because you're getting the hiss and some of that raw energy already from the two high paired guitars, it might be okay to make a cut here. I'll probably put a low pass in here at the top to take some of that hiss and some of that noise out. We don't want it to be overloading, but I don't want to hug the frequencies that I'm seeing here in Procure 3. I want to give it a little bit of air so that I'm still getting a little bit of that raw in the room vibe. So I'll show you what that looks like. Now, if I was doing gent or deathcore or something like that, that's probably where I would put that cut. But since I'm not, I'm looking for something a little bit gnarlier. I'm going to bring it out a little bit and let some of the scream back in. You see, sometimes there's even a tiny little boost that you can make there just to capture a tiny piece of the hiss. It's not going to overwhelm the other guitars, but it's going to make the entire quad track a little more pissed off. So I like where we are with this. I'm going to do the same thing and copy and paste this over to the other guitar from this pair. And now let's hear what the whole thing sounds like in context now that I made a... So now we're starting to get somewhere that I'm liking, but to the trained ear, you're going to hear it's still muddy. There's still a little bit of a mess in the lower mids, and I'm still not quite getting the separation that I want. This is where I like to introduce saturation. Saturation is great, and what saturation really does is it just floods the signal that you have with harmonics that aren't already there. And what those harmonics do is they bring more definition to the notes. So you can still be thoughtful with how you apply saturation to achieve the balance that you want between these different guitar tones that are coming together. So for saturation in this context, I like to do it first at the track level. So what we're seeing here is Black Box. I usually use this plugin or another plugin called Decapitator by Soundtoys. Those are my two go-tos. A little bit goes a long way with saturation. And what we're looking at here is this plugin is only on one of the guitars. And we're going to go one by one to apply saturation. And as I said, a little bit really goes a long way. So I'm going to go ahead and engage the saturation, bring the knob pretty low here. I'll leave it flat, so we're focusing on the mid-range of frequencies, which is a good thing to do for the high pair guitars. I'm going to hit play, and I'm just going to dial this until I hear a little bit of harmonic energy getting added here. I think right about there is pretty good. The other thing I really like about Black Box is it gives you this air knob. And what this does is just put a little bit more air on that high shelf that I already put into this track using Procure 3. So I'll probably just put a tiny bit of that just to say that I did. Sounds good to me. Sounds raw and a little bit more exciting. So I'm just going to grab these settings from Black Box, just like I did with the EQ, and I'm going to throw the exact same thing on my second pair. Now we're going to go through the exact same exercise in the low pair. The only difference that you'll see here is rather than focusing on the mid-range frequencies with the knob on flat, I'm now focusing the saturation on the lower frequencies with the knob on low. And I have the saturation engaged. I'm not going to use any air here because I do not want the signal to be bright. I want to keep it dark. And I'm just going to dial this to taste. I think right about there is sounding pretty good. So let's go ahead and grab that saturation setting and copy it over to this other guitar. We've picked the guitars that we like. We've got the tone coming through them that we like. We've done the appropriate level of EQ carving. We brought in a little bit of saturation to make it a little bit more exciting. Now we need to start thinking about gain staging. What gain staging does is it enables you to control the levels of all the different tracks in your song very meticulously at every stage in your mixing process. So at this point, I'd like to say, all right, I'll probably come back and tweak a thing here or there, but the track level mixing feels pretty good on these guitars. So what I want to do now is apply processing to them as a single unit. This is going to help me eventually start to glue this whole thing together, give them cohesion in the context of the song. What that means is rather than putting one EQ plugin on each of these tracks and manipulating it independently, I want to set these tracks up so that I can make one move with one plugin, one type of processing, and have it affect all of these tracks exactly the same way. So Logic has a really nice way of doing that called a track stack. So I'm going to highlight the tracks that I want and create a track stack. And I'll click summing stack. What this is doing is it's creating a bus, a term that you probably heard before. We're sending all 4 of these tracks to one track now. And now that one track I can manipulate however I wish. So we have a bus here. Let's call this, rhythm bus. And just as a good rule of thumb with your gain staging, I like this bus for the rhythm guitars to ultimately land in the mix somewhere between -10 and -6 dB. And the reason this is so important from gain staging is not only so that you can process these things all together, but also so that you can move their levels all together. The worst thing that could possibly happen in a mix, and it's happened to me a million times, is you don't give yourself enough headroom. You don't have enough room in sound to work with when you get to the mix and you're doing the mix bus processing. So you wind up with something that isn't quite processed the way that you want it to be. It's not quite loud enough, and you literally can't turn it up anymore because you ate up all that headroom. So I really like this rhythm bus to be coming in, probably in this case, right around -6 or -8. You can see that it's peaking somewhere right around 5 here, probably a little hot. And you can hear how at that level, it's really starting to fit in a little bit better with the instruments. Now that I've done this type of gain staging, I can really get a lot more control out of what I want to do with these guitars next. And this is something that I think a lot of producers, especially early on, overlook. You might want to have a lot of these auxiliary channels, right? Sometimes I'll send 4 guitar tracks to a rhythm bus like I'm doing here. Then I'll send that rhythm bus to a master guitar bus where I have my lead guitars and my overdubs. And then I'll even send that to an instrumental bus sometimes. So sometimes at the very end of a mix, I have one knob for instruments and one knob for vocals. And that's just a nice level of control to give yourself as you're getting further in your mix. Since this is about rhythm guitar, we're going to keep it on rhythm guitar. I'll do a session on gain staging later if you're interested. But now we're really set up to glue this entire bus into the mix. We've bussed it, we've gain staged it, and we're ready to move on to the gluing stage. So let's talk about glue. You'll hear producers talk about gluing things into a mix quite often. And as you get further and further with mixing, and you do this for hours and hours, you'll be able to intuitively hear when pieces of a mix are not glued together. What that sounds like is you have instruments kind of all over the place, clashing with each other. They're just not moving as a unit, right? It's like you have a team of star players and they don't know how to work all together as a team. So the way to glue things together is to apply similar processing to them. This creates the effect of them, again, all being in one room together. And since what I'm trying to do is capture that in the room intensity, I need to be masterful at how I glue things. So first, what I want to do is glue these guitars together with each other so that just on its own, this rhythm bus starts to sound like it's moving as a unit. It starts to sound a little more cohesive. And then once I've accomplished that, I'm going to figure out how do I then glue all those rhythm guitars together into my bigger mix so that they're not sticking out, but they are poking through enough with clarity to give focus to the song. A lot of different types of processing will give you the glue effect. You can use the same reverb on a bunch of different tracks. You can use the same saturation on a bunch of different tracks. But the biggest standby for gluing things together is compression. You'll notice that I haven't applied any compression yet. A lot of people like to put compression on individual guitar tracks. I don't like to do that. I think it sucks the soul out of the guitar. You lose that intensity. You flatten it out too much. However, I love putting compression on the bus. Very, very gentle amount. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a compressor to my rhythm bus. And my go-to for this is always going to be the API 2500 bus compressor. And the reason I like this is because when you think about what compression does, what it's doing is it's catching peaks, it's leveling out dynamics, and it's kind of bringing an evenness to a song. That's not exactly what I want to do here. A really nice benefit of compressors like this one is that it also creates its own type of color, a sound that you start to think of as a gluey sound. The hardware for the API 2500 bus compressor had a very particular set of circuits and transformers and overall materials that give it this really magical musical sound that I just absolutely love. So what I want to do is I want to capture that sound and use that sound to glue these instruments together, but I really don't want to compress them too much. Saturation is already compressing them, and if you over-compress it, you're going to get a track that sounds lifeless and robotic. So to do that, the way that I like to set this compressor is I like to use the old setting. The old setting is a lot more gentle. It doesn't create an aggressive compression in the upper mids. The thresh detector, I like to also put on normal. Similarly, we're going to dial back some of the aggression that this plugin can provide in compression. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the knee. If you're interested in compression, there's a lot of resources where you can go really deep on what compressors do. I'm not going to do that here today. I'm just going to tell you that these three settings are going to set this up to be the gentlest imaginable compression. So now I'm going to shift over to the knobs, the attack and release specifically. Let's focus there. What attack is doing is it's determining how quickly the compression starts. And remember, I don't want aggressive compression. So what that means is I want as much time as possible before the compression starts so that it doesn't feel abrupt. It doesn't feel like it's pumping. So I'm going to make the attack as long as possible. The equal opposite applies to release. The longer you hold on to the compression, the longer the release, the more you're going to be feeling that compression in the mix. And I want to let go with the compressor very quickly. So I want it to take effect very slowly and let go very quickly. And I'm going to have release at its shortest possible setting for that reason. Next, we'll shift over to the ratio. This is determining the intensity of the compression once the threshold is reached. I'm going to keep this very low, 1.5, maybe 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial the threshold very slowly but surely until I see that I'm only taking off 1 decibel of gain. I only have 1 decibel of gain reduction, which if you're used to compression is very, very minimal. And what this is going to do is it's going to glue these guitar tracks together without overly compressing them. Right about there feels right to me. So as we were dialing that compression in, I noticed that I'm still getting a little bit of muddiness in here that I don't really like. Now that I have these guitars all bussed together, glued together as one unit, I can actually EQ them all together as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a small notch to take out some of the mud. You can see it spiking right in that 200 to 400 hertz range there. That's where I'm going to make my dip. Nothing too crazy, just a little mud cleanup. Now, the very last piece of processing that I'm going to use here to get that professional quality guitar tone that I'm looking for in my modern metal mix is tape saturation. I love tape saturation. I love the sound of vintage tape. I love what cassettes sound like. And what's great about tape is it has this interesting distortion to it that you'll notice if you ever hear kind of a worn out tape. And what's great about that distortion is although it's messing with the signal, it's doing it in a really musical, beautiful, and vintage sounding way. So what I want to do is apply just a touch of that to the entire guitar bus here. And this is really going to help glue it into the mix. We've glued the guitars together. Now we want to glue those guitars in with the other instruments in the song. So I'm using the tape plugin by Softube here. There's a bunch of good plugins for this out there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a setting that I really like right out of the box. Where are you? Yeah, classic 70s OVU. I'm going to dial it back because this is a pretty aggressive setting in this particular plugin. And I'm just going to play with the amount until I really start hearing these guitars fit nicely with the other instruments in the song. So obviously there's still a lot of mixing to do here, but the focus for today was really getting that guitar tone dialed, and I'm happy with where I'm at now. I think that I can get the rest of what I need to get done here by focusing on the mix bus eventually and by getting the levels right in my mix. All right, so what did we cover today? I said the goal for today was to figure out how to get a professional sounding guitar tone in your metal mix, and we broke it down into 6 component parts. Number 1, nailing your tone. Let's get the right guitars, the right amps, the right settings, the right cab, and the right microphone. Once you get all those things together, you want to get them quad tracked. Quad tracking gives you that wall of sound effect and really enables your guitar to occupy the full frequency spectrum. Once you got your quad tracking dialed in, you want to then apply some EQ carving. You want to make small moves in EQ so that you can really balance the weight of your low-end guitars with the bite of your high-end guitars and let the things that make each of those guitars special really shine through. From there, we talked about track level saturation. This is applying some harmonic information to those tracks, and that's just going to put a highlighter on everything else I just said. It's going to bring out even more high-end articulation and round out that low end even further. So once you get the track level stuff figured out, that's when you want to start thinking about gain staging and bussing. So we took those 4 tracks and we bussed them to one broad bus that we called the rhythm bus, and that gave us a lot of control over gain. We have the stage where we can change the gain on the individual tracks, and we introduced the stage where we could change the gain on the bus where all the tracks are located at once. And that set us up perfectly for the last piece of the puzzle, which is gluing the whole thing together. And to glue these guitars together, the first thing we did was apply some mix bus compression. And the second thing that we did was give it a little bit of tape saturation to really glue it into the mix. So hopefully you learned something today or heard something that gave you an idea. That's my approach to getting that massive wall of sound metal guitar tone that I really like in a professional metal mix. If this was helpful to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more from Very Friendly Studios.